Welcome to Our Watch and Women with Disabilities Victoria's launch of Changing the Landscape, a national resource to prevent violence against women and girls with disabilities. In this launch, violence against women is discussed. If you or someone you know is impacted by sexual assault, domestic or family violence, contact 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800 737 732. If you are concerned about your behaviour, reach out to Men's Line Australia by ringing 1300 789 978. You can also contact 1-800-RESPECT via the National Relay Service. Contact the relevant number listed below and ask for 1-800 737 732. For Speak and Listen, dial 1300 555 727. For TTY, dial 133 677. For an SMS relay number, dial 0423 677 767. Alternatively, you can use web chat, which is available 24 hours a day at chat.1800respect.org.au.
Hello everybody, and welcome everyone to the launch of Our Watch and Women with Disabilities Victoria's Changing the Landscape, a national resource to prevent violence against women and girls with disabilities. My name is Drisana Levitsky-Gray. I'm wearing a black top, I have dark brown wavy hair, and I'm wearing glasses with clear lenses. I have a dark blue plain background behind me. I am very proud to be an Our Watch ambassador, and I'm also proud to be your MC for today's event. To start proceedings, I would like to introduce you to Jodie Barney, who'll do an acknowledgement of country.
Hello everyone, thank you Drisana, thank you all. My name is Jodie Barney, and to explain to you what I look like, I have blonde hair, I have a bone-coloured shirt on, I have black framed glasses with clear lenses, and the background behind me, you may see or notice I have a red, orange and white dotted Aboriginal artwork. I would like to acknowledge all the traditional custodians of the lands that we're all zooming in from today. I'm here on the lands of the Yorta Yorta Bangarang peoples, here in Shepparton, Victoria, Australia. I wish to pay my respects to all elders, past, present and emerging. I'd also like to talk about the diversity and celebrate the diversity of the peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters across this country, and that we've never ceded sovereignty. I would like to also acknowledge all other First Nations people who are watching today. It's important that women and girls with disabilities, particularly, to pay respects to you, to pay respects to their kin and their communities. I wish you good health and wish you well. Today, I would finally like to acknowledge all First Nations women and girls with disabilities who have passed as a result of violence. I'd also like to stand in solidarity with all women and girls who are continuous survivors of all forms of family violence and violence that have occurred in their lives. Thank you, Drisana. I'll hand it back to you now.
Thank you, Jodie, for that beautiful acknowledgement of country. And I'd like to acknowledge Jodie herself. She's a proud Biri Gubba Urangan woman, a deaf woman from Queensland, a leading Aboriginal disability cultural trainer and consultant who has worked for over 30 years in the disability space across Australia and even internationally. Again, thank you so much for your time to be here, Jodie, and give us the acknowledgement of country. I would also like to acknowledge that I'm currently not in Australia. I'm currently presenting to you from Vancouver in Canada, but my heart is still there with you in Australia as an Australian. I just wanted to let you know about the country from which I am presenting. I'm coming to you from the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh lands here in Canada. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, as I do for the elders there in Australia, past and present. I'm actually traditionally from Noongar land in Perth, so I'd like to acknowledge the elders there, past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to share a little bit about myself and how I came to be part of the ambassador team for Our Watch. Now, let me just check that there are no technical issues at the moment. I'll just clarify that I am Drasana. You can see me signing. I am the person presenting. So if you do see someone by the name of Drasana who has dark brown wavy hair signing, that is me, your presenter, your MC. I'm using Auslan Australian Sign Language to conduct these proceedings, as I am a deaf woman myself. Not a worry there, Tess. I saw your comment in the chat. I'm so glad you could join us. So yes, my connection to Our Watch is really thanks to Natasha Stott Despoja. No doubt you know of Natasha. She has been involved in Our Watch as a chair on the board, and she's also very passionate about deaf and hard of hearing people and the disability community achieving equality in society. And through my advocacy journey and through her advocacy journey, our paths crossed, and she invited me to become a part of Our Watch. This was back in 2017. At that time, and as I am now, I have been so passionate and proud to elevate the rights of deaf people and sign language as integral parts of the community and for the disability community. At the same time, I was a little bit unsure at the time because I myself have lived experience. I don't have lived experience of family or domestic violence, but I'm very aware of the needs of those in my community, the deaf and hard of hearing community, to access information that is relevant to us, particularly on this subject. So in talking to Natasha, we realized that there was an important need here to create a collaboration. Me, with my knowledge and expertise in this field, as a subject matter expert in the field of deafness, and with her subject matter expertise, that coming together, we could create a wonderful intersection. And I've been proud of that until this time. I would also like to pay my respects to Sue Salthouse, who had a huge impact as an ambassador and an involvement in the development of this resource, because women and girls with disabilities, deaf women and deaf girls, are much valued people in our society, but very often are marginalized. So I'm very honored to be part of groundbreaking work along with Our Watch and Women with Disabilities Victoria to create, to be involved in this event where we can launch an amazing resource, changing the landscape. As always, we can't do massive efforts like this alone. To change the world, we do that one person at a time. Now, I would like to very quickly introduce each one of our fantastic presenters today. They'll briefly show themselves on screen so you can see them. And then later, they will appear again on screen to present. Firstly, I would like to introduce to you Our Watch CEO, Patti Kunesley. Hi, Patti. Now, I would also like to welcome Women with Disabilities Victoria CEO, Nadia Mattiazzo. Hello, Nadia. Lovely to see you. Australian Human Rights Disability Discrimination Commissioner, Dr. Ben Gauntlet. Welcome. Hi, Ben. Thank you for being here. Now we have the Senior Policy Officer with Women with Disabilities Victoria, Jen Hargrave. Hi, Jen. Director of Policy and Programs with Women with Disabilities Australia, Heidi LaPaglia Reid. Hi, Heidi. Policy and Research Leader from Purple Orange, Ellen Fraser Barber. Hi, Ellen. Senior Lecturer in Criminology and Criminal Justice at the Federation University, Dr. Margaret Camalieri. Hi, Margaret. Now, Senior Advocate with People with Disability Australia, Francis Kwon Farant. Hi. Thank you, Francis. PVAW Program Manager at the Multicultural Centre for Women's Health, Aurora Delcourt. Hi. And last but not least, Senior Advisor here at Our Watch, Melissa O'Reilly. Hi, Melissa. Wonderful. Well, you've just met our amazing presenters today, and you'll be properly introduced to them shortly. But before we do progress with the launch today, there are a few housekeeping reminders we'd like to run through. You'll notice at the beginning of the presentation, the accessibility features have been included and explained. If you've only recently arrived, I'll run through them very quickly again. We do have Auslan interpreters working today, and they'll be visible for the presenters. Likewise, when I am, as I'm conducting the MC duties, you'll see me signing and you'll hear our interpreters speaking. We'll have live captions available for you. All you have to do is press the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also check your Zoom menu. If you have questions or you have technical issues, feel free to use the chat and send a message. Ben is our meeting support person. Feel free to contact him, select his name from the attendees list and send him a chat message. There's also more information in the chat message about accessibility. There's also a Word document there that will give you more information that's accessible to you. In the middle of today's proceedings, we will be having a short 5-minute break. You may notice that the Zoom event today is being recorded. That won't be made publicly available. That's purely for internal purposes. If you do experience anything that triggers you today, because we will be discussing violence against women and girls with disability, we're sorry for that, and we won't be talking specifically about events of violence, but the broader topic of violence against women and girls with disability, and that may trigger very strong feelings. So please think about who it is you may be able to approach in your life that you can discuss, And we also encourage you to leave at any time if you feel you need to go and talk to that person. If you or someone you know is impacted by sexual assault, domestic or family violence, you can contact 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732. You can also make contact with the 1-800-RESPECT service by means of the National Relay Service. For example, if you use the Speak and Listen service with the National Relay Service, simply dial 1300 555 727. If you use a TTY, use 133 677. Or if you use SMS Relay, dial 0423 677 767 and tell them to make contact with 1-800-737-732, which is 1-800-RESPECT. Alternatively, you can use the web chat function on their website, which is available 24 hours a day at chat.1800respect.org.au. If you are concerned about your own behaviour, please do reach out to Men's Line Australia by ringing 1300 789 978. These support avenues will be made available to you in the chat function as well. Well, we're very excited to begin our presentations. I'd like to now introduce our Watch CEO, Patti Kunesley, who will provide an introduction and overview of the importance of prevention of violence against women. Patti is a leading health, welfare, and education professional and was Chief Executive Officer of Women's Health Grampians for 9 years prior to joining Our Watch in 2015, first as a Director, Practice Leadership. She has been the CEO, Chief Executive Officer of Our Watch since June 2018 and is passionate about working with all settings, such as workplaces, all levels of government, to promote gender equality, to prevent violence against women. Welcome, Patti.
Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you, Drazana, for such a beautiful introduction to our event, and to Jodie for your beautiful acknowledgement. My name is Patti Kunesley. I have blonde-ish curly hair. I'm wearing gold-rimmed clear glasses and an orange shirt. I have an Aboriginal badge in the shape of Australia, and I have a background that includes an Our Watch banner. I too will start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land across Australia on which we live and work. And today I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us today. It is a huge privilege for me and for Our Watch as an organisation to be here today for this important event. And I would also acknowledge Dr. Ben Gauntlett, Nadia Matiano, and I'd like to make a special welcome to Louisa Fernside, Sue Solhouse's daughter, who's joining us today. Welcome to you, Louisa. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank those of you and some who are not with us today for your valuable input into this work over the last few years, especially the members of our 2 project advisory groups, and to the many stakeholders across the country who were consulted during the development of this resource. Today, in partnership with Women with Disabilities Victoria, we're here to launch Changing the Landscape, a national resource to prevent violence against women and girls with disabilities. I would also like to pay a special tribute to the late Sue Solhouse. She's a long-time advocate, an ambassador, a leader. She championed tirelessly for the rights of women and girls with disabilities, and she contributed to this resource. Sue made a generous donation to Our Watch, which enabled us to begin the work that led to the development of this resource. And for that, we are all extremely grateful. We would also like to acknowledge the commitment, advocacy and activism of the disability and women's movements, who for generations have never wavered in their work to improve the lives of women and girls with a disability. Without you, without your commitment, resilience and dedication, we would not be here today. Violence against women continues to be a national and indeed international crisis. Last year in Australia, according to Destroy the Joint, 43 women were killed by gendered violence. Already this year, the lives of 4 women have been taken this way. And we know that this is the tip of the iceberg, with millions of women in Australia experiencing life-crippling harassment, violence and abuse. And that can be sexual, physical, emotional, verbal or financial. And for women with disabilities, we know that they experience all forms of violence at higher rates than women without disabilities in public and private spaces. The evidence shows us time and time again, locally and internationally, what underpins violence against women are the harmful norms and attitudes and beliefs that do not value women as equals within a broader societal context of gender inequality and sexism. And for women and girls with disabilities, this is by no means the whole story. As many of you are aware, ableism is also deeply embedded in our society. Ableism is when beliefs, processes and practices privilege people without disabilities and disadvantage and exclude people with disabilities. It drives discrimination, violence and abuse. For women and girls with disability, ageism and gender inequality intersect, causing even higher rates of violence against them. For example, many women and girls with disabilities experienced ableist attitudes, such as the assumption that they are vulnerable or incapable or that they need protection. Ableism and sexism are demonstrated in every aspect of our lives, in the joke on the street, in the poor representation of women in the media and in leadership, or when doctors or policymakers remove a woman's reproductive choices because she has a disability. None of this is acceptable and it must change. Violence against women with disabilities is preventable. It's not inevitable. And we can all play a role in stopping this violence. Our Watch's focus is on primary prevention, on getting to the root of the problem. We know to prevent violence against women, we need equality at the heart of everything we do, in our individual attitudes, in our systems and structures, and in our practices. We must value women as equals in public and private settings across the entire Australian landscape. This is, of course, also the case when it comes to preventing violence against women and girls with disabilities. That's why we call this resource Changing the Landscape. Importantly, Changing the Landscape not only identifies what causes violence against women and girls with disabilities, it provides a blueprint for actions we must all take to stop it from happening in the first place. It tells us that to prevent violence against women and girls with disabilities, we need to address both gender inequality and ableism at all levels of our society. This resource points to the importance of all prevention work being informed by and led by women with disabilities themselves, and for all organisations like Our Watch to work alongside as strong allies. Our Watch is honoured to have partnered with Women with Disabilities Victoria and to have been supported by expert advisory groups and other experts and individuals in the development of Changing the Landscape. This type of partnership is vital to ensure important work is genuinely informed and led by women with disabilities themselves. And it results in more meaningful outcomes, like Changing the Landscape or the development of the easy English version of the resource, which, as many of you will know, is designed for people who have difficulty reading and understanding written information. This resource is also available in both PDF and Word versions and at level AA accessibility. And we have just shared a link in the chat now. This resource is intended to have a wide audience. Based in the evidence, it can be used by workplaces, education institutions, policymakers and governments, and of course the disability and violence against women sectors. By making sure safety, dignity and respect for women and girls with disabilities are at the heart of all our strategies, we can put to an end this terrible violence. In closing, I would like to thank again Women with Disabilities Victoria for their partnership, the advisory group members and other experts for sharing their time and expertise, and of course Sue Salthouse for her lasting legacy. Together, we can build a society where all women are safe, valued, respected and equal. Thank you.
So much, Patti. We truly appreciate you providing an insight into violence against women in Australia, and also for an overview of the importance of prevention. Like I've said before, as a deaf woman, I know how important it is to have access to information in Auslan for myself, which is my native language, as it is important for any woman with a disability to access and get information and services and support that meets their needs. We look forward to seeing what happens after changing the landscape, because you're right, it's not just one person, we want to change the whole landscape. Now, I'd like to introduce two speakers from Women with Disabilities Victoria who will co-share this presentation. We have Nadia Mazziazzo, the CEO, who has had a long-term commitment to increasing community and professional inclusion and access for women with disabilities. And also Jen Hargrave, a senior policy officer who has a focus on improving violence responses and preventions. Jen has chaired the project advisory groups for this project alongside Melissa O'Reilly from Our Watch. I'll hand you over now to Nadia, who will start with the presentation before handing over to Jen. Welcome, Nadia.
Thanks, Tristana. And hello to everyone and welcome to this event, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Nadia and I am joining this meeting from the lands of the Wurundjeri people. I too would like to acknowledge the work of Sue Salthouse in initiating work on this amazing resource. I am the CEO of Women with Disabilities Victoria. I am a blind woman and I am using screen reading software and a braille device to read my notes. We were very pleased to work with Our Watch to develop this work because we share the understanding that violence is preventable. This resource brings together the best available Australian data on violence, which, as you can imagine, is something which organisations like Women with Disabilities Victoria have been speaking about for many years. Women with disabilities currently experience around twice the violence experienced by women without disabilities. As these resources explain so well, this violence is driven by the compounding factors of ableism and sexism. We know that this violence is higher for women who experience colonisation, racism, and other forms of discrimination. Unfortunately, the current data, Australian data which is available at the moment, does not tell us much about the violence experienced by girls and women over 65, but we know ageism and power imbalance also play a role. At WDV, we have always had a commitment to speaking up about the prevention of violence. WDV has a membership of over 800 women and non-binary people from around Victoria, and our staff and our board are primarily women with disabilities. Our day-to-day activities are about creating opportunities for women with disabilities to access employment, boards, networks, and information. We understand that these activities in themselves are steps towards preventing violence. Additionally, since 2012, we have received funding to deliver training and programs about preventing violence against women with disabilities. We hope that you can use these resources in your work and in your communities. We can all play a role in making a safer Australia for all women and girls with disabilities. Again, thank you for asking me to join this meeting. Special thank you to Patti and Our Watch and their work on this resource. I would now like to hand over to Jen Hargrave from WDV. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you, Nadia. And as we've said, the resource we're launching today is called Changing the Landscape. And when women and girls with disability think about our landscape of our community in Australia, there's a lot to celebrate, especially among one another when we look at other women and girls with disabilities. But let's face it, there's also a lot that we'd like to change, a lot that we need to change. When I tell people from developing countries about the rates of violence against women and girls with disabilities in Australia, they're often shocked. They're shocked that violence against women in a rich country like Australia happens the way it does, because they've said that they've thought that the violence that happens in their country is a legacy of poverty and of war. So they're shocked that in our rich country, we can be trapped in violence in group homes or in mental health inpatient wards and in support worker relationships and in family relationships. Since the 1990s, disabled women's organisations like Women with Disabilities Australia and where Nadia and I work at Women with Disabilities Victoria have been advising on what needs to change. We hope that this resource can deepen understandings of how to shift sexism and ableism. We made this resource to be useful for people working on preventing gender-based violence and working on disability rights. To shift sexism and ableism, we need to do more than challenge attitudes though. We have to start digging up the structures that grow poverty and that grow segregation. We hope that this resource can be useful for those leading the National Plan on Violence Against Women and those working at the Disability Royal Commission and on broader social policies as well. It would be positive to see public policy positioning us more as a community rather than as an economy. This is especially so as we face widening inequalities in the pandemic and in climate change. In disasters, the arrows to health and safety from violence point towards local community inclusion. They do not point towards overworked workforces in insecure employment. Our launch today is a reminder of where we sit in relation to human rights. We are looking ahead to a parliamentary week with a bill on religious discriminations and a bill on NDIS cuts. Both of these bills further undermine Australia's international human rights law's obligations to women and girls with disabilities. On a more positive note, what we're launching today is the culmination of paid work from project advisory group members who we'll be hearing from many of soon, and also paid consultations with people from around Australia. The expertise of women with disabilities was central to the consultations.
Jen, letting you know we're at 30 seconds left.
Thanks, Jess. We'd like to thank all those who had input. And a last word of thanks to Our Watch, who have approached this project with a commitment to collaboration and consultation. WDV would particularly like to mention Maeve Kennedy, the original project worker, and Emma Partridge and Mel O'Reilly. I can tell you that Mel has followed up on every bit of input received through the project. I'll now hand back to Drasana. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadia and Jen. Thank you so much for highlighting the urgency of preventing violence against women and girls with disability. You're right, it is a human rights issue. They have so much to participate and invest in the economy, really, too. As a young deaf woman, as a young professional, I can say that our human rights, once they are assured, everything is possible. The world is our oyster. So we're so glad to see this work done, and I'm so glad to hear you talk about systemic changes needed. Now, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Ben Gauntlet. He is the Australian Human Rights Disability Discrimination Commissioner. Ben commenced his 5-year term as Commissioner on May 7, 2019. Prior to commencing as Disability Discrimination Commissioner, he worked as a barrister in Western Australia and Victoria with a broad-ranging practice. As Commissioner, Ben advocates to remove barriers to people with disability participating in society and to ensure the human rights of people with disability are respected. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Tristana. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I have brown, somewhat disheveled hair, and I'm wearing a suit with a blue shirt, and behind me I have an Australian Human Rights Commission logo. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm presenting to you today from Gadigal country of the Eora Nation in Sydney, and I pay my respect to any Aboriginal Torres Strait members of the audience today and acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait leaders past, present and emerging. First, above all today, I'd like to congratulate Our Watch and Women with Disabilities Victoria, including the project advisory group, the people that were consulted with, and the practitioners who made comments on the resources for what is a fabulous publication. It's a publication that shows tremendous insight into not only the lives of women, but also the lives of people with disability. It is a resource, though, that will be able to be used by the entire disability community, irrespective of gender. It is a wonderfully important publication that will hopefully change lives. It was also lovely and important, I think, to see that Sue Salthouse was recognised throughout the publication, and I acknowledge her daughter in the audience today. The touchstone of human rights is dignity. The right to live a dignified life has been a huge issue for people with disability in Australia and across the world. The need for a disability-specific approach to preventing violence against women with girls with disabilities is obvious. The statistics are clear that women and girls with disabilities are disproportionately affected by violence. However, when you consider issues such as challenges concerning communication and structural disadvantage, this probably understates the amount of violence that is occurring. The Changing the Landscape national resource looks at the cause of this violence. There are gendered drivers of inequality, such as the condoning of violence against women, and ableist drivers, such as negative stereotypes about people with disability. The Changing the Landscape national resource also acknowledges other intersectional drivers of violence, such as age, race or sexual orientation, and reinforcing factors that may facilitate violence. It is critical that we consider the rights of people with disability. We always remember to use a gender lens to look at issues. Australia signed and ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2007 and 2008. And Article 6 of that convention explicitly states the obligation on all signatories to take all appropriate measures to ensure that women and girls with disabilities can effectively exercise and enjoy their human rights and fundamental freedoms. But the article itself is a cross-cutting article, and general obligations and principles, supported decision-making, preventing forced medical procedures and interventions, access to housing and healthcare are critical human rights issues. And it's wonderful that the Changing the Landscape report has picked this up. At this time in Australia, publications such as Changing the Landscape are of fundamental importance. In 2011, we passed the first National Disability Strategy following the Shutout Report. And 10 years later, when we passed the Australian Disability Strategy, many of the issues that arose in the first National Disability Strategy have not been closed off upon. One of those is violence against people with disability. We must always remember that we had the Royal Commission, or we do have the Royal Commission into Violence, Abuse, Neglect and Exploitation concerning people with disability for a reason. That reason is because of violence that has been propagated against people with disability in the past and sadly in the future. Thank you for the creation of what is a wonderful publication. Changing the Landscape is an important pillar upon which a number of disability policies will be built now and in the future. I commend the authors for a wonderful publication, and I hope to read it, how it's being used now and in the future. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Ben. We really appreciate your knowledge and your insight and your work there at the Commission. We so much appreciate it. And I'd like to join in with what you said, that this is about human rights. Everyone has a right to be viewed with dignity and to live the life that they dream of. It's our responsibility too, as an Australian society, to make sure we uphold these human rights. They're called human rights for a reason. They're not a privilege, they're a right. So thank you again, Ben, for your time. We greatly appreciate you being here today. Now I'd like to introduce our next presenter, Melissa O'Reilly, Our Watch Senior Advisor, who along with Jen Hargrave has led and managed this project and is responsible for bringing this national prevention resource to life. Welcome, Melissa.
Hi everyone, thanks Rosanna. I'm Melissa. My pronouns are she, her. I have reddish brown hair, glasses with light pink rims, and I'm wearing a pink shirt. I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend those respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are here today. I'm here to talk about what to expect in changing the landscape, and to help you navigate the resource, I'd like to describe 3 of its main sections. These are the drivers of violence, the essential prevention actions, and the prevention principles. So the first section that I'll describe is the intersecting drivers of violence. We know that gender inequality drives violence against women, and ableism drives violence against people with disabilities. But what is unique about this resource is that it shows how gender inequality and ableism intersect and compound to drive violence against women and girls with disabilities. It is the intersection of these drivers that explains why violence against women and girls with disabilities is perpetrated at much higher rates and is often accepted or tolerated in society. Changing the Landscape looks at both of these factors. It shows how the gender drivers of violence play out in particular ways for women with disabilities. It also names 4 expressions of ableism that are strongly linked to violence against women and girls with disabilities. These ableist drivers are negative stereotypes about people with disabilities, accepting violence against people with disabilities, controlling and limiting decision-making and independence, and social segregation and exclusion. Our project advisory group members will present these drivers to you after the short break. Changing the Landscape also acknowledges that ableism and gender inequality can't be considered in isolation from other systems of oppression that can drive violence against some women with disabilities. Aurora from the Multicultural Centre for Women's Health will speak about this shortly. Changing the Landscape also includes a conceptual model or a diagram which visually depicts all of these intersecting drivers of violence, and we encourage you to check that out. The next section that I'll describe is the essential prevention actions. Because the only way to end violence against women and girls with disabilities is to take a primary prevention approach, Changing the Landscape sets out 6 essential actions that we as a society must take to address the ableist and gendered drivers. For example, one essential action is to promote the inclusion of women and girls with disabilities in all aspects of life. And to achieve this, some of the things that we need are for governments to end policies of segregation in education and employment and living arrangements, and for governments to address the high rates of incarceration of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women with disabilities. We need employers to create employment and career progression opportunities for women with disabilities, and to improve employer attitudes so that women are actually offered those opportunities. We also need strategies to make public and private spaces, such as public transport, workplaces, shops, and recreation facilities, accessible. There are many more actions outlined in Changing the Landscape, which stresses the importance of a holistic approach, one that works to prevent violence by changing the whole landscape for women and girls with disabilities. Finally, Changing the Landscape provides a set of principles to guide work to prevent violence against women with disabilities. These principles will help people to undertake prevention work that is inclusive of and led by women and girls with disabilities. Before I hand back to Drizana, I would like to thank Women with Disabilities Victoria, especially Jen Hargrave, and our extremely dedicated and supportive advisory group members, and of course, Sue Salthouse, for all of their efforts in bringing Changing the Landscape to life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. You're right. This resource will go a long way in ensuring that women and girls with a disability and deaf women have a place, a treasured place in society, and also to make sure that we have role models like us that ones can look forward to and celebrate in Australian society. Because when we see ourselves in well-known role models, we know we have a right to live the life of our dreams, that we have a place, that our ambitions can come true. Thank you so much to the team. Okay, everybody, welcome back. We'll have to carry on today. Now, we want to talk further about these ableist drivers that compound violence against women and girls with disability, and the importance of an intersectional approach, not just picking one element. We know it's a multi-layered issue. So now I would like to invite the first of our 5 panelists today. Our next presenter is Dr. Margaret Camalieri. She's a senior lecturer in criminology and criminal justice at Federation University. She's an academic with a particular focus as a researcher and advocate on the lived experiences of people with disabilities in their interactions with the police and the broader justice system. Margaret will be outlining the first driver, negative stereotypes about people with disabilities. Welcome, Marg.
Thanks so much, Drizana. I'll just get my notes up. Thank you, Drizana, for the introduction, and to Our Watch for the opportunity to contribute to this fabulous resource and to work with a wonderful group of women, including, of course, Sue Salthouse. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that I live and work on Wadawurrung land. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I have short grey hair, glasses, and I'm wearing a black and pink top. My background behind me is blurred. My contribution today will focus on the negative stereotypes surrounding people with disabilities as one of the ableist drivers of violence against women and girls with disabilities. I would like to clarify that when I use the phrase people with disabilities, it's to acknowledge the person first and does not imply that all people with disabilities experience disability or the disabling barriers in the same way. People with disabilities are subject to various negative stereotypes, such as being childlike, asexual, hypersexual, or burdensome, or who are prone to telling lies, or that people with disabilities are incapable or dangerous and so must be managed and restricted. These and other stereotypes intersect with negative gender assumptions about how women should look and act, including that women must be nurturing, carers, and mothers. Using this example, when negative stereotypes and assumptions intersect, an assumption may be made that women with disabilities cannot be good mothers, a perception which results at times in children being removed. These and other stereotypes reinforce and perpetuate ableist views about people with disabilities. And these stereotypes can motivate or be used to justify violence and contribute to violence, contribute to women and girls with disabilities being perceived as less worthy of respect and as legitimate targets of violence. These negative, derogatory and discriminatory stereotypes give license to perpetrators to act with impunity, knowing that women and girls with disabilities may not disclose the violence, or if they do, they may not be believed. Thank you. And back to you, Drizana.
We see, yes, true harm in stereotypes, how we are perceived and how we perceive others and their worth in society. What an impact that has. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Ellen Fraser Barber. She's the Policy and Research Lead at Purple Orange, a systemic advocacy organisation. Ellen is a disability activist with a focus on safeguarding and violence prevention. She'll be presenting driver number 2, accepting or normalising violence against people with disabilities. Welcome, Ellen.
Hello everyone, so my name is Ellen and today I'm meeting with you from the land of the Kaurna people in Adelaide, and I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and also pay my respect to any Indigenous people who may be here today. I describe myself as a white European heritage woman with light brown shoulder-length hair. I have one eye, one ear, and a lopsided face, so I identify as someone with a disability. We can't deny that society operates in ways that devalue the presence of women and girls with disability, and of people with disability more generally too. And this underscores the way that people with disability are treated. So this devaluing is ingrained in our society and our culture, and it's systematic and it's systemic, and it creates this context in which violence is accepted and normalized. And often this violence is perpetrated, but it remains unquestioned. And that unquestioning is problematic. We continue to report the rates of violence as being higher among women and girls with disability, and we hear this time and time again, and yet we do not hold perpetrators accountable. Yet if we pay attention to the language and the way that we respond in daily life when we're talking about people with disability, we can see that pattern of disrespect, discrimination and violence. And we can also see the way that we normalize violence, we trivialize it, and we also routinely downplay it and also dismiss it. There are many examples that I can give you to show you this. For example, we may condone and permit violence, such as restrictive practice. For example, the over-medication within group homes, which is a form of restrictive practice, and yet it's permitted in the policies and in the practices without much questioning on the impact. We also justify instances of violence. For example, we may say that it's necessary, and there are lots of examples in the media recently about children with disability who have been locked in small confined spaces in the school playground. And we're seeing that, and it's often reported as a way of managing behaviours of concern and keeping them safe. We also downplay and trivialise violence, and we limit the accountability for violence within service systems. So we see this when violence is seen as an incident or as misconduct, and it is reported as an internal issue which requires performance management rather than seeing it as a crime which warrants investigation, legal action, and more empathy. It is also easy to dismiss violence, particularly when it is another person with disability who has perpetrated this violence. And often it's dismissed as part of their disability. We couldn't avoid that. It's not their fault. And that's a very common scenario. We also excuse disability. We also excuse violence, though. We often see this in media reporting. So people will often attribute violence to factors such as carer burnout or stress. And this is blamed as the reason for violence and abuse, and it is excused. We also often see the halo effect, which is where a partner, parent, friend, or others are seen as the angel and they can do no wrong because they're positioned as carers. And as a result, any violence we use
Alan,
is dismissed.
just letting you know you're at 30 seconds, sorry.
Okay, cool. So this media really mirrors the ideologies and the attitudes of what we see in society. So it really communicates this sense of burden, cost, and pity. And we really need to challenge this, and we need to start having higher expectations and hold people to account for their actions.
Thank you so much, Ellen. You made such fantastic comments that I wholeheartedly agree with. Sometimes we see it being excused, as you said, because of carer burnout or something like that. But we are living with disability 24/7. And we would like to be seen as the priority and our experiences prioritized, not to just sit back and allow these instances to occur. Thank you so much. Now we'd like to hear from Heidi LaPaglia-Reid. Heidi is the Director of Policy and Programs at Women with Disabilities Australia. Heidi is a proud autistic feminist activist from Hobart, Tasmania, and has worked with WWDA for a number of years now. She represents them on a number of advisory groups with sector stakeholders, and among other issues has a strong interest in ensuring that efforts to support the safety and reproductive rights of women and non-binary people are inclusive of people with disability. Heidi will be discussing driver number 3, controlling people with disabilities decision-making and limiting independence. Welcome, Heidi.
Hi everyone, thank you for that introduction. Just for a quick visual description, my name is Heidi. I have large pink rimmed glasses and straight dark hair, and I'm wearing a black top. I would first like to acknowledge that I'm joining today from Nipaluna, the land of the Muwinina and Palawa people, and pay respect to our elders past and present. First of all, I wanted to say that I've worked closely on the development of Change the Landscape over the last couple of years, and I'm really proud to be part of the launch today. But as mentioned, specifically I wanted to talk briefly about one of the key factors that contribute to the high rates of violence and abuse that our community experience. And that is that women with disabilities, for women with disabilities, violence and abuse is often intrinsically linked with widespread ableist assumptions about disabled women being unable to make their own decisions. Due to these ableist attitudes, along with legal forms of substitute decision-making, such as guardianship laws, women with intellectual and cognitive disabilities are routinely abused and exploited in many different forms. Some examples of these include where other people in the lives of women with disabilities are deferred to make decisions for them, where adult women with disabilities are told what they cannot do, eat or wear by their parents, siblings, support workers or carers. This is extremely common for women with intellectual or cognitive disabilities and women who live in institutions such as group homes and aged care facilities, where a service provider has significant control over their lives. Unfortunately, the mainstream definitions of violence, and in turn the plans and frameworks to prevent and address violence against women, often do not cover many of these types of violence, nor the broader experiences of many women and girls with disability. That is what is different about this framework. What I think is really fantastic about the framework is that it not only recognises the routine removal of agency and decision-making rights from women and girls with disability as a form of violence, but also points out that there are laws and state-enforced policies that reinforce and condone these practices. In particular, one thing that the sector has been advocating for a long time, including WIDA, where I work, is the need to transition away from all forms of substitute decision-making, including guardianship and power of attorney arrangements, where not absolutely essential, and to replace these with supported decision-making, which give women and girls with disability back their agency to make their own decisions. Overall, I hope that this recommendation, as well as all of the others in the framework, are taken on board by frontline workers, service organisations and governments in their efforts to address gender-based violence. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Heidi. I completely agree. As a deaf person who is proud of my independence and my complete autonomy in my life, I couldn't imagine things being any different. And as we work as an Australian community and society, we need to ensure that we honour and promote the rights of people with disability to make their own decisions and to have complete independence. Thank you so much, Heidi. Our next speaker is Frances Kwon Farant, Senior Advocate at People with Disability Australia. She has worked in the community and disability sector for over 18 years. Frances is a social scientist and graduate social worker and is currently undertaking her PhD on community research, policy translation, and the implementation of the CRPD in Australia. Frances will be presenting Driver 4, Social Segregation and Exclusion. Welcome, Frances.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you. Just to give a description of myself, I have shortish blonde hair. I'm wearing a caramel coloured top. I have glasses with brown rims and clear lenses. My background includes a white screen and a window with a plant hanging down. There's also 2 dogs outside, by the way. I'd like to acknowledge that I am coming to you from Cubby Cubby country, which is in southeast Queensland. And I'd like to acknowledge our colleagues at FPDN who live very close by. Segregation. Segregation in all its forms drives violence against women and girls with disability because it silences us. At a structural level, it occurs in formal policies. Therefore, this is state-sanctioned segregation. And by default, you could say state-sanctioned violence. Segregated education with special schools. Segregated employment, such as with Australian Disability Enterprises, or sheltered workshops, which employ people with disability in segregated settings, which we called warehousing. That is, the people are warehoused, and where it is legal to pay people with disability well and truly below the minimum wage. That's anywhere between $2 and $6 an hour. Segregated living arrangements, such as in group homes, where people are allotted co-tenants without any choice or preference. Segregation also occurs through practices of indefinite and arbitrary detention, where women with disability, especially First Nations women and girls with disability, are detained indefinitely in prisons and forensic psychiatric units, often without any conviction. These are places of violence. Rates of violence in institutional, segregated and closed settings can also be very, very high for many reasons. People with disability in segregated settings are less likely to have access to support networks where they can learn about or even disclose violence, or because violence in these settings is often downplayed, justified, or accepted as normal. or because people with disability experience a range of barriers accessing justice. And I nod to our Commissioner, Human Rights Commissioner there, this is the CRPD, Accessing to Justice Act, Article 13 and 14. People with disability are often not believed when they report violence. They are not believed to have the capacity to report the violence. Segregation silences us. These policies and practices of segregation and exclusion are informed by ableist ideas, where sometimes segregation is depicted as being in the best interest of the person with disability. And because of stereotypes of people with disability, as was noted earlier, that they need protection or are incapable of living by themselves. Segregation and exclusion reinforces these harmful ableist ideas by increasing the invisibility of people with disability in many public spaces, by limiting our opportunities for connection between people with disability and without disability. And as a result, segregation and exclusion sends a message that people with disability are more legitimate targets of violence. When the ableist ideas that underpin segregation intersect with gender inequality, ageism, racism, and other forms of oppression, the impacts can be even more significant. For example, people with disability are already very significantly overrepresented in the criminal justice system. And this is particularly the case for First Nations women with disability and women with psychosocial disability, including First Nations women with psychosocial disability. This cohort is among the fastest growing groups of people being detained on remand, often without conviction. Segregation drives violence. Ableism allows segregation to happen. We must change the landscape, and we must do it now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frances. What amazing points you've raised. And I would like to talk about this idea of social segregation. As Frances has said, we can see ableist behaviours at work and being a big factor. What's interesting is with deaf and hard of hearing people, often social segregation has led to us being with our peers more, with our community more, and being able to use sign language with our role models. And society often believes that if we are with other signing deaf adults, we could not possibly be successful or thrive in a hearing world. So I guess I must be a failure of some kind because I live and thrive in the hearing world and the deaf world. And you're right, we must look at what true inclusion means, what true access really means, and fight these negative forms. Thank you so much. We've now reached our final speaker for today, Aurora Delcourt, Prevention of Violence Against Women Program Manager at the Multicultural Centre for Women's Health. She is a program manager specialising in human rights who worked for many years in international cooperation abroad, mainly within the United Nations. Since arriving in Australia, Aurora has worked with Victoria Legal Aid in family violence response with In Touch. Aurora will be speaking about the importance of taking an intersectional approach to the prevention of violence against women and girls with disabilities. Welcome, Aurora.
Thanks, everyone. Hi, so my name is Aurora. I'm a white woman with dark hair, wavy hair, and today I'm wearing a green top and silver earrings. So before talking about intersectionality and the importance of intersectionality, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodian of the land on which I live and work, which is the Bunurong land for me. And I want to pay my respect to the elder past, present, and emerging. So obviously, as explained by my colleagues, women, the people identify as women, is not an homogeneous group. And so while gender inequality, gender driver, and ableism are always relevant in explaining violence against women and girls with disabilities, they may not be the most significant factor in every context. Indeed, sexism, gender inequality, and ableism exist in relation to multiple and intersecting forms of oppression and their corresponding system of power and privilege. And here, obviously, I'm talking about racism, colonialism, classism, heteronormativity, homophobia, ageism, among others. And all these forms of oppression interact and intersect so that not only are women and girls with disabilities perceived as being unequal to men and to people without disabilities, but there are also a range of inequalities among women and girls with disabilities. And so all these intersecting forms of oppression and privilege affect the prevalence and the dynamic of the violence against women and girls with disabilities. But it also affects, obviously, the way they're going to try to seek for support and the way they may receive the support. And so because of all these systemic inequalities, it is essential to address violence against women and girls with disabilities using a feminist intersectional approach, which aims at addressing all forms of oppression. So what do we mean when we say, let's use an intersectional approach in our work? Well, basically it means let's try to go beyond explanation or solution that use single categories to describe people or issues. Let's acknowledge that we are shaped by many factors interacting together. Using an intersectional approach also means identifying and transforming systems of power and privilege that may negatively shape individual outcomes. And by doing that, it's through collaboration and partnership and trying to work towards social equity. What do we mean by intersectional approach? We mean actively reflecting on and addressing our own relationship to power and privilege as bystanders, researchers, workers, or advocates. We also mean trying to understand that there is no fixed hierarchy of disadvantage and that we may experience or understand the way our lives are impacted by power or oppression in a different way. It's also about trying to recognize that people can experience privilege and oppression simultaneously at the same time, and that in fact, it may depend on the context and the situation. Using an intersectional approach is also about trying as much as possible to center marginalized experience, voice, and leadership. And so it was really an honor for MCWH to be part of this advisory group that has been designing and developing this resource, but it was also essential for ensuring that the experience of women from migrant and refugee background is heard and taken into consideration in the prevention space. This partnership was also very useful for us because it has been a way to self-reflect. And it gave us an opportunity when developing our new strategic plan for the 5 years to come to try to further embed inclusive, intersectional, and feminist approaches and messages into our programming. So thank you so much for the invitation today and for the opportunity to be part of the development of this amazing resource.
Thank you so much, Aurora, along with all of our other presenters too. Thank you so much. And I would like to thank you for that overview of ableism, the drivers that contribute to the multiple forms of oppression that can intersect in the lives of women and girls with disabilities. It's these factors that drive the high rates of violence against them. Well, we would like to wrap up our launch today. Once again, thank you to all of our guest speakers, and thank you to all of you for joining in today and watching. The prevention of violence against women with disabilities is such an important and urgent issue. Changing the landscape shows that we all have a role to play in preventing this violence. It sets out the actions that are needed at all levels of society to stop violence against women and girls with disabilities. The idea is to stop it even before it starts. All the Changing the Landscape resources are available on the Our Watch website, and the link is in the chat function for your ease of reference. Once the launch is finished, we'll be sending out an email. If you have any specific questions, please respond to that email and we'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. Again, thank you so much for attending, for participating in our launch. Thank you to the presenters. I was honored to be your MC today. I'm Drazana Levitsky-Gray, and thank you for being part of Changing the Landscape.
Websites: ourwatch.org.au/resource/changing-the-landscape/. Contact Our Watch, inquiries at ourwatch.org.au. Women with Disabilities Victoria, wdv@wdv.org.au.